This is a very important year for us as a city, particularly in planning. It's because over the next year, we are going to really set the stage for what's going to happen for the next couple of decades. We're working hard on some of the city's toughest challenges right now: affordable housing, homelessness, integrated transportation system. But we're starting with a really good foundation. We have a strong economy that's generating a lot of jobs, which is, has good things and bad things about that's happening. A lot of people and businesses want to be here. Seattle, we have a lot of Seattleites like you who really care about the community and care about all the equity issues that we are facing too. And we really want to make sure that our prosperity is shared. So that's the lens that I was looking at the data that you're going to see tonight, because it really is going to impact how we're going to move forward together as a community to create the kind of place that we all want to live in. So tonight's topic, and the interesting work that Peter Steinbrueck has done, is about measuring success. A lot of you in the room, because I know a lot of you, were all engaged in the comp plan process that we did quite a while ago. And what Peter has done is come back and measured, did that comp plan effort succeed? Did we get the kind of neighborhoods that we all envisioned and really wanted? And what things worked and what things didn't work? This is really groundbreaking research. I haven't seen this in other communities, and I think it will give us some real strong foundational ideas for how we want to move forward in our next comprehensive plan. So Mayor Murray talks a lot to us in the mayor's office about the comprehensive plan. When he was on the campaign trail, he heard a lot from neighborhoods about the good things that were happening about growth and the challenges that people and communities were having about growth. And he is looking to this comprehensive plan process to put those issues on the table and try to see if we can't move forward in the next generation of growth better than we did this time. So we'll be looking for your input on that. So I think with that, I think we'll just get ready to start the presentation. And so next up is going to be Diane Sigamore, who's the director of the Department of Planning and Development. And she's going to talk a little bit more about the comprehensive planning process. And again, I'm very excited. Thank you all for being here. We have a great adventure that we're going to do together over the next couple of years.
So as Kate mentioned, the Seattle 2035 that we're working on, and we've been doing, having citywide conversations and conversations with different organizations and in different neighborhoods. How many of you have participated in at least one Seattle 2035 conversation? Let's see the hands. That's fantastic. What about 1994 comprehensive plan? Okay. And how many of you, pardon? Well, I wasn't going to go back that far because that would date me as well. So, how many of you were not born in 1994? I can't see with the light. Okay. Because this is going to be your city. So we need your input as well. Today, Seattle is a very different city than what we were in 1994. We will be very different in 2035. And people are making various choices, different choices these days about where they live, where they work, how they travel. And these are the things that we need to reflect on and see how we can be, as Kate said, an even greater city in 2035. So why are we growing? Many of us have chosen to stay in the city. Other people are coming back to the city. Families are staying here and raising their children here. And they see that it's a great place to raise a family, and the job opportunities are great. We also have people moving in for jobs, for business opportunities, the natural environment, the quality of life that Seattle has, and I think Seattle is seen as a very progressive city. We're a pretty hot city when you read the national journals these days. And Washington is fortunate to have had a Growth Management Act adopted so that we look at these things in a comprehensive way and in a long term and think about how we can really preserve the good things, keep our farmlands, keep our forests, and cut back on the amount of distance that you have to travel, and try to have places where you can work and live close by or use public transportation. So Seattle adopted its comprehensive plan in 1994. And the basic assumption was that we would bring density to our existing business areas and that we would provide housing in those areas, we would provide better access to public transportation, and improve the quality of life. And we would tend to encourage our development in our urban villages and our urban centers. And 20 years later is a good time, I think, to take a look at how that growth happened. And some of the good news is that we know that 75% of our housing growth and our job growth has happened in our urban centers and urban villages as we had planned. But what is happening in the neighborhoods? So we asked Peter Steinbrueck to help us look at those neighborhoods. Your civic activism over the years and your time on council made you the perfect candidate to help us understand the comprehensive plan that was adopted and to see how that had been implemented and what was happening in our neighborhoods. And so Peter and Mikaela Winter tonight will be, their Steinbrueck Urban Strategies, will be presenting the findings of the report, Seattle Sustainable, I'm getting too excited about this. Seattle Sustainable Neighborhood Assessment Project, referred to as SNAP. This is a very data-driven study that measures the results and achievements in our urban village strategy. Too far away?
Yes, you can't make the adjustments right. Is that better? It's a very sensitive microphone.
Okay. I tried to be more sensitive. Okay. So I will, before Peter and Mikaela start, I would just like to make a few announcements. We are being filmed by Seattle Channel. The SNAP report will be on our Seattle 2035 site tomorrow. And we'll have a question and answer opportunity after the presentation. And our illustrious Mark Hinshaw, who is a noted urban planner, urban designer, crosscut contributor, author, many things, will be moderating the panel. And we also want to hear from you tonight. You should all have these forms, and we hope you will turn them in as you leave. And we are also doing photo journal tonight, where you could write down your thoughts about what Seattle would be like in 2035, what you want, and we'll be taking photos, right? And so they'll be standing over there, right out there. So please participate in that as well. And now, Peter and Mikaela.
I had no idea that so many people would turn out midweek to hear about a voluminous planning study that deals with the past 20 years. But this is really more about the future, I think, than the past, but what we can learn from the past to inspire us to do even better in terms of how our city evolves into the future. So I want to thank you all sincerely for coming. It's really, it's elating to see you here. I hope that this will be the beginning of a discussion. And of course, we've got the Super Bowl to look forward to, where everybody's attention practically in this town is going to be shifted before long. Go Hawks, okay? Okay, we'll get on with the program here. With the outline here, what we'd like to cover very quickly in our limited time. This is a snapshot of the SNAP report, okay? It is 180 pages long, chock full of data that's never been seen or heard before, and some analysis and some recommendations light in here. I hope you will take the time to look deeper, and we'll get into that in just a second here. We'll cover the scope and purpose, the urban growth distribution on a macro level. Where did all these 120,000 people go? Where were the houses built? Where are the jobs? How do we meet our targets there? Our methodology for compiling this report, the research and study methodology, we'll just touch briefly on. We have selected out of the 22 indicators 4. So we have 22 indicators, 10 urban villages, 20 years of study and research here that comprises this report. And we're trying to give you a glimpse of it, of some of the highlights there. with some key findings, and as I said, recommendations that will be a little bit on the light side because I really think it's for all of you and the city and the policymakers to decide what should follow and how this information might get used. So that's the outline, and we'll move now to the purpose and scope. Okay, with a nice quote from Mayor Murray, who has consistently said since he has been in office, there is a need for greater transparency in providing information to the public. That's a quote. And that he wants to, quote, develop a stronger system of metrics to measure each city department's progress toward program goals. I think those are pretty important statements. This is where the inspiration for this study came. Thank you, Mayor Murray. The Seattle Comprehensive Plan Toward a Sustainable Seattle, written in 1994, and actually the first planning director of 1994, Rebecca Barnes, is here. Where are you, Rebecca? You're not going to escape. There she is. Okay, so she takes some ownership in the original 94 plan. Now the university architect and planner for the university is here. Where was I with this? Okay, so as we prepare to set the course for the next 20, we certainly want to attempt to measure the achievements and results of the past 20 so we know where we came from, what we've done, where we're going, and be intentional about it. The SNAP is, as mentioned, a data-driven pilot study because this was the first, as Kate said, and to do just that, to measure the results of this 20-year comprehensive planning effort under the guise of the Urban Village Strategy. It is the primary analytic tool for the outcomes through a set of 22, our study is the primary analytic tool for the outcomes of the comprehensive plan and strategy through these 22 carefully chosen sustainability indicators. Our research was limited to examining, and I want to give you a couple of disclaimers and limitations here, was limited to the comprehensive plan goals under the Urban Village Strategy through the selection of 10 out of 32 urban villages, and Mikaela will get into that shortly, and centers. So there's 32, we took 10. The project excluded review of our 2 manufacturing and industrial centers. We weren't scoped or tasked for that. It excludes zoning regulations and any assessment of the efficacy of the zoning itself. And architectural and urban design aspects, which many of us care greatly about, myself included, we did not assess the quality of the architecture and urban design results of what has been developed. And finally, we did not undertake an assessment of the neighborhood plans that were developed in the late 90s and early 2000s and passed by the City Council. That would have been a much more exhaustive undertaking. So the Urban Village Strategy is the bedrock, if you haven't heard about it by now, of the Seattle Comprehensive Plan. And it's pretty simple. It is the primary tool and urban planning framework used to guide and manage our urban growth. The strategy is intended to protect single-family neighborhoods, and it states that, by directing growth into the established mixed-use neighborhoods of our city, largely our neighborhood business districts, where you are all familiar with, I assume. This targeted approach provides for more efficient use of public investments in infrastructure and services to meet those growth demands. So the 1994-2014 20-year urban growth pattern here that we see, moving on now, again, this will just be a high-level data set on where the growth occurred. There's a breakdown of it by urban village in the report. So you can see your neighborhood, if you're one of those of the 10, how much growth you took. You can also go to the DPD website, and there's a more elaborate matrix there of data for that. But what we found there, remarkably, was that the city planners in 1994 estimated residential growth with crystal ball accuracy. Take a bow, Rebecca, take a bow. With 60,524 households added, achieving 100% of the growth target that actually occurred. Also, exactly as planned, approximately 75% of all new housing built occurred within the 30 designated urban centers and villages throughout the city. I think that's pretty impressive. So whether you like it or not, whether you like the results or not, the targets were met, and what was planned for is what we got. And it wasn't by accident. However, the projected growth of between 130 to 146,000 new jobs was not realized. This might surprise you given the uptick in some of the major global businesses we're seeing in Seattle. But in fact, over the 20-year span, and two major recessions I should point out, only 56,594 new jobs were created, missing the mark by a wide margin. Actually, 38% of what was projected in new job growth was met, was actually achieved. Now, we've seen in the last year or so, since even our data was collected, that there's a pretty major uptick going on. Whether it will continue is anybody's guess, but we're in a new positive mode of optimism here, I think, in that regard. So that's sort of the global picture there. And now I'd like to turn to Mikaela, who will share how our research methodology was composed and the analytical tools developed, along with some interesting results. So Mikaela?
All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and give a brief background on how we really approached this research process. And as Peter mentioned and Diane earlier, this evening, the basis of this research project was the Seattle Comprehensive Plan, 1994 to 2014. So the core values of the Seattle Comprehensive Plan that are identified in the actual text of this document came about in a kind of a community visioning process preceding the 1994 Comprehensive Plan. These values are community, environmental stewardship, economic opportunity, and social equity. And these four core values gave us kind of a big picture background and guided our research process and our indicator selection. The next step that we took in our research was to do an exhaustive research effort of community indicators, neighborhood assessment tools used in other cities that are comparable to the city of Seattle throughout the country. And what this really allowed us to do was really think about best practices, areas for improvement, strengths, weaknesses, so that we could be informed moving forward about what's already been done in this area of neighborhood level reporting and data-driven assessment to kind of inform city planning. And then in that process, we compiled a very exhaustive list of social, community, environmental, and economic indicators that have been developed by other cities, planners, community members in these efforts that we had identified for indicator assessment and performance. And this was kind of our indicator bank, if you will. It was a very large 3-ring binder filled with sheets of paper of indicator after indicator. And this really gave us a basis for our own indicator selection process for the city of Seattle. So one of the things I want to emphasize in the indicators that we selected is this results-oriented, outcome-driven approach. So what we really wanted to do was identify indicators that were informing what the comprehensive plan is seeking to do. So we took our selection of indicators and we paired them with comprehensive plan goals and policies so that when we went through the data collection process, we would have an idea of how does this indicator inform these specific areas that the city of Seattle is aiming towards and has been working towards over the past 20 years. So that whole idea of outcome-driven indicators was really important throughout our research process. As Peter mentioned, we selected 22, which is quite a feat in our regard because we had to really go back and forth on a lot of different things. There's a lot of areas that we wish that we could cover, but we really wanted to simplify it as much as possible because a lot of those 50 indicator projects are really, really hard to replicate in the future, so we wanted to be mindful of that moving forward. And then we organized those 22 indicators under 4 outcome groups. These outcome groups, they're similar to the comprehensive plan core values, and that was intentional. We really wanted to embody what the comprehensive plan was looking to accomplish. So we have resource use and conservation, healthy communities, open space and development, and shared prosperity and opportunity. So here is kind of the table or matrix of our indicators. I'm just going to leave this on the screen for not long at all, so if you want to kind of dive into it further, please see the PDF copy that will be available on DPD's website following the presentation. But we have the resource use and conservation outcome group, which looks at the utilities and how we're using the different natural resources that we have available to us here in the city of Seattle. So there's 6 indicators under that outcome group. We have the healthy communities outcome group. So those are really looking at community growth and providing the opportunities and resources equitably throughout the city of Seattle for community development so that people that live in those areas feel like they have a connection to the places and the people that they live. And then we have open space and development. There are 4 indicators under that outcome group. These were our GIS indicators, or Geographic Information Systems indicators. So we looked at the distribution of parks and open space and the access of parks and open space in these 10 urban villages, and then looked at tree canopy cover and impervious surface as well. And then lastly, we have shared prosperity and opportunity. These are our economic and social indicators that look at equity throughout the city of Seattle. And as you can see, there's city investments and then also indicators like poverty rate and unemployment. So up on the screen now, you see a map of our beautiful city of Seattle. There is a great distribution of urban villages throughout the city. As Peter mentioned, there are 30 urban villages and 2 manufacturing and industrial centers in the city of Seattle. The ones in red, yellow, and orange are the 10 that we selected for the purposes of this study. And what we really sought to do in this urban village selection process was get a good geographic distribution. We wanted variation in scale and demographic characteristics, but not too much variation because we wanted there to be some similarities across these areas so we could draw some interesting conclusions from the data that we collected. So the SNAP urban villages, as we like to call them, there are 2 urban centers, University Community and Downtown, 3 hub urban villages, Lake City, Ballard, and West Seattle Junction, and 5 residential urban villages, Westwood Highland Park, North Beacon Hill, Rainier Beach, Eastlake, and Aurora Licton Springs. So now we're going to transition to the actual data. So as Peter mentioned, we selected 4 of the 22 indicators to cover in this presentation, just to give you a sampling of the kind of information that we collected and the recommendations that we were able to generate from the information. So we're going to cover transit ridership, 911 crime-related calls, tree canopy, and city investments in infrastructure and capital facilities. And there's 1 indicator from each of the 4 outcome groups covered here. So first, transit ridership. This data was sourced from the King County Metro Bus Automated Passenger Counts database. The years 1994 and 2013 was the data that we collected for this indicator. And the goal of this indicator was really to understand the relationship between transit ridership in these areas that are targeted for increase in population, housing, and employment growth. So what we first did, as you can see in figure 1, this is for the downtown urban center, we first graphed population density and transit ridership as 2 separate trend lines so we could see the relationship between the 2 over the 20-year period. Then the actual metric that we used for this indicator was average weekday boardings per person per acre. So this demonstrates the change in transit ridership over the 20 years given change in population density. So figure 2 shows that trend line for the urban centers, University Community, and Downtown. And then figure 3 here, we have the residential and hub urban villages.
And this gets more interesting here, too.
So we have figure 3, which is the residential and hub urban village average weekday boardings per person per acre. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of variation across the different villages. I'd like to point out Eastlake kind of is maintaining a relatively stable trend line. For those of you who are from Seattle, Eastlake is a transit corridor, and I know there have been a lot of community complaints about the fact that King County Metro bus services don't stop in those areas. That might explain why, even as population increases in those areas, the transit ridership has remained relatively stable over the 20 years. So but overall, what we can see here is that in these areas where there is quite a bit of population, housing, and employment growth occurring, that our transit system is at higher and higher demand. So that's something to keep in mind. And Peter's going to speak.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Just
speak about the recommendation there.
Yeah. Put it back on the on that graph just for a second. Okay. What's particularly interesting to see here, as you comprehend the graph, if you can, is that where over time on the is it the x-axis on the bottom? Anyway, the lines go up. That is where transit ridership has increased beyond population density in those areas. Where it's flat, it's more or less maintained consistently with the growth of those communities. And where it turns down, it's actually lost ridership. So that's some pretty interesting and useful information, I think, for transit planning and for the future. So let's go to the recommendation here. So the recommendation, as I said, we're going to pretty much go light on recommendations because we think that's more for the policymakers and for community. But in this case, it's pretty much a no-brainer. We are often stuck for hours in traffic in automobiles and in buses because they use the same roads. But it's pretty clear with a system in Seattle that carries a metro transit system. Now, this doesn't include light rail. I'll just put that out there. But our daily ridership in Seattle is close to 300,000 riders. Imagine if that were taken away from us, if our system, our transit system, were taken away. We would have absolute gridlock and havoc. People would not be able to get to work and to their daily destinations. So we can soundly declare, I think, today and this day forward, that we are a transit-dependent city. Some say we're an auto-dependent, but we're also a transit-dependent city. But to meet future growth demands with the expectation of 115,000 more jobs, 60,000 more households, more or less replicating what we saw in the past 20 years, added 20% growth, you can be sure that without increased transit service, routes, corridors that are dedicated, and a seamless transportation system that reduces auto dependency, we will have absolute gridlock without those kinds of investments and improvements. So that's really the no-brainer that I just want to, excuse me, underscore. We will need to make invest much more in transit and significantly more in service, and especially linking the urban centers, the employment centers, the villages, where there is the highest level of activity and mobility needs are greatest. Okay, back to Mikaela.
All right, so the next indicator I'm going to speak to you briefly about is crime-related 911 calls. This data was sourced from the Seattle Police Department computer-aided dispatch data, and we actually received raw data for every year in every urban village of every 911 call made in the last 20 years. So we had CD-ROMs, actually, if you can imagine that. For me, that seems kind of weird, of massive amounts of information that we took in. And so what we wanted to do with that information was find a way to sort it into something that was more meaningful. So we took that raw data and we pulled the 911 calls associated with a criminal incident. And then from that, we sorted those crime-related 911 calls into 3 types. So we have violent crime, vice crime, and property crime. And then, so now, as you can see on the figure here, we have a year 1998, which is our benchmark year, 2013, which is our current year. And if there is variation in the benchmark year, that's due to inaccessibility of past data, so just keep that in mind. And we have 2 years across 10 urban villages, and you can really see the relationship over time across these different areas. And then you can also kind of target areas where there might be a higher rate of property crime and a lower rate of vice crime, or any sort of combinations. You can really understand what's going on in these different areas, and then over the 20-year time period.
Okay, yeah. The interesting thing here is the varying results that we find and the trends over a long period of time where there are persistent patterns of criminal activity that are informed by these 911 calls. Now, these aren't the actual arrests and adjudications, but they're the first point of alert when it comes to crime in your neighborhood. The causes and correlations are many influencing this type of criminal activity, and they're complex. And so we did not begin to think we were capable of, really doing a deeper analysis. I will say that hats off to the police department because they were able to provide us with this information. They collect an enormous amount of data. I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's hard to get to in some cases, but they've got it, and they have a fairly good website. But this is a different cut of the data that they have that I don't think has ever been shown before. So further analysis, what appears to be lacking in today's policing practices, and this is partly coming from my own personal experience having served on the Public Safety Committee and been involved in policing practices over the years. This has nothing to do with the current reform issues, but our the lack of clear performance goals and measures for crime prevention. Not just tracking the criminal activity, but what are our performance goals for preventing crime in the first place, especially in historically high activity areas of the city. So with that in mind, and with area-specific data, we believe that long-term patterns of criminal activities can be targeted for crime reduction through best practice forms of micro-policing, community policing, and prevention strategies. Thank you. Mikaela?
All right, so next for tree canopy, our precious trees here in the Pacific Northwest. With the support of the University of Washington Urban Ecology Research Laboratory, as Peter mentioned earlier, we researched and identified the most sophisticated method to date to produce an estimate of tree canopy cover in 1993 and 2014 in our urban villages. This methodology used a 1-foot resolution, orthophotography, Google Maps, and iTree canopy imagery. And it's a point estimate technique founded by Dr. Moscow and Dr. Richardson, who recently in 2012 conducted a canopy assessment using Seattle as a case study and looking at the different methodologies that are used to produce tree canopy cover. So from this data, the big picture takeaway, and it might be an obvious one, is that in our urban villages, there's a much lower percentage of canopy cover than at the city of Seattle average of 28.5%, which was calculated in 2012 in that assessment. And what that speaks to is in these really high dense areas that are seeing development and increase in population, there's a very, very minimal actual space in terms of acres that you can really look to increase canopy cover and open space and those types of things. So really understanding areas where that tree canopy might be suffering can be really useful moving forward. One of the other things that I want to just point out is that past methodologies, there's a lot of uncertainty and irregularities, so it's really important to benchmark and then identify a specific methodology that you can carry forward so that those comparisons over time are as precise and accurate as possible.
Okay, good, thanks. So we know that trees are very precious to us here in Seattle. Seattle residents love their trees, and that we are the envy of cities around the country. And when people fly in, it's one of the things they notice is the incredible greenness of our city, the Emerald City, as they say, and the beautiful urban forests that we have. We're also seeing trees coming down here and there, and you wonder what's going on and how are we doing. So with that in mind, we sought the very best practices today for measuring and tracking urban tree canopy, and we believe that we have found that in the current best practices that we could all benefit from, those of us who care about tree canopy. We recommend, with that in mind, that the city consider establishing new tree coverage goals for the urban villages, the centers of our neighborhoods throughout the city, where there are no specific goals that are set. We only have citywide goals, a goal, citywide goal. And we don't have it for these areas that actually have, in most cases, significantly less tree cover than you will find in the average. And this, again, points to the value of the sub-area data collection, because would you know, well, probably Ballard you'd know, but in some areas, would you know that the tree canopy cover is half of what it is on average citywide? Lake City, for example, is one area. There are other areas. And how are we progressing as we redevelop the city and we see a lot of privately owned properties redeveloped where major mature trees are coming down? How would we know how we're doing, and are we keeping up? And so this is where I think these technologies come into play and this new methods of measuring. So what we're recommending here is that the city reevaluate its measuring practices, number one, establish a tool and a measure that we can go forward with that is the best practice, most reliable we have today. And start from there, and maybe reconsider some of the goal setting to the sub-area level, and keep on that and stay with it over time so that we can really have full transparency and accuracy in the data collection and tracking. We can also strengthen our commitment to tree preservation, because we don't want to see unnecessary loss of tree canopy. It's not just about planting new trees, it's about preserving what we have. So we see the need to, as I said, track and report or suggest that report the loss of mature trees as well as the gains, so that we know how the equation actually works, both privately and publicly. And those are our recommendations for tree canopy.
All right, so next we have city investments in infrastructure and capital facilities. This data was sourced from the City of Seattle Budget Office CIP data tracking system. And the data that we gathered is represented as CIP appropriations per capita. So the first obvious thing that you see when you look at this figure is that there is variation. And in some instances, it's pretty large from just kind of looking at it as a bar graph. And that's a good, interesting point. You can also see that in the Westwood Highland Park and Eastlake urban villages, there is a 0, which is because there was no record in the CIP database of investments that had been made in those urban villages between the years 2005 to 2014. Now, I just want to emphasize that doesn't mean that there haven't been investments made in those areas. There's a lot of issues that we kind of discuss with the City Budget Office about tracking CIP investments. One of them being a Seattle City Light project might occur in one urban village area at a specific address, but the investments made in that area serve a greater population. So there's those kinds of considerations to think about, and what this really speaks to is how can we better track these investments made so that we have a better picture here. And so due to those limitations, you can't draw any super strong conclusions from this data here because there are a lot of holes in the data that we gathered, so just keep that in mind.
I see people smiling, laughing, shaking their heads in agreement. We got a problem here. We can do better. We agree. We think so. And we think we need to do better in this regard. And we had frank admissions of that from some of the city staff we spoke with, that this could be significantly improved. In fact, the mayor has said in his first budget speech earlier this year that there are, quote, numerous outdated, obscure, inefficient budget systems, and with, quote, no guarantees we are paying for outcomes or making progress on these issues. Our budget-related data mining challenges were extremely difficult in some areas, that in itself. So that's why we have expressed these qualifications here about not reading too much into the area-specific data as far as it relates to the city's investments. But it is nevertheless of some value in telling, as was the process of attempting to collect this data and the imperfect nature of it all. So the good news is that there are these opportunities to improve budget accountability through better coordinated, performance-based CIP data tracking, CIP, which is just this capital investment program of the city. If we are serious about directing public investments efficiently in the infrastructure and services needed to meet growth demands, both inside and outside our urban villages, these investments need to be better tracked and the budget process itself outcome-driven. Some of you may have been here last night for the nightly show at City Hall with the people's budget process. I wasn't here, didn't get any takeaways from that. But so we're suggesting here that the budget process itself be organized in a way where there is transparency, clarity, purpose in terms of prioritization and strategic investments that focus on where the needs have been identified throughout the city, particularly in our neighborhoods and urban villages and the centers of those where the confluence of people come and go. So closer monitoring of urban village investments and results to ensure the desired outcomes. We also think it might be advisable to have a 6-year strategic investment plan tied to the urban village strategy. This is about making it all work and all come together and delivering on the promises where growth and density is increasing. Outside the urban villages, we offer this comment that is important also to ensure that other areas of the city, such as the north end that lacks streets and infrastructure, and parts of the south and southeast areas also, that they also have adequate resources to meet infrastructure demands and other needs, including growth needs in areas outside the urban villages. Okay. I guess we're moving on. That's it for our indicators. I hope we got your juices flowing with some of that, because there's lots more there that you can dig into and drill down into. So now we move on to our key findings. And on the achievement side, starting with the good news, is that we think the urban village strategy is working as intended to distribute most of Seattle's growth to the urban villages. And we think that that is a wise, efficient, smart approach to citywide planning. Transportation and mobility system, as I said, obviously is still evolving. We're not there yet. We still can't get there as quickly as we'd like and as reliably. We know that. We're not fooling ourselves. But it is evolving increasingly year by year with all the new investments that have been made publicly to a multimodal system that we hope one day will become seamless and allow people to get around freely, accessibly, without relying on the automobile. That is the goal there, and obviously more investment and attention is needed, but the demand is going to grow. Demand is going to grow for transit ridership, for bicycle improvements, for pedestrian improvements, and for non-SOV alternatives. The third point here is the citywide environmental stewardship achievements are nothing short of outstanding. Now, we haven't shown you the data there, but there is a consistent, positive, steady upward trend in our conservation achievements with the utilities and natural resources. There's always room for improvement. Now we're one of the few, if not the only cities in the country that penalizes you if you don't recycle your food waste. But compost, that is. Sorry. But I encourage you to look at the graphs on the energy and environmental indicators that we selected. And I think it's probably, it's probably not another city that has that impressive record. And they also keep very good data. It's not so great at the neighborhood level. We had trouble with that and had to abandon some of those efforts. To try to get recycle rates by neighborhood urban village was almost impossible. So that's it on the achievement side. There's much more, but those are sort of the top line points there. So let's go now to areas for opportunities for improvements. And there's always opportunities for improvement. We know that. And we're a high-achieving city. So here we go. Starting with city data collection methods I've spoken to, I'm reinforcing this. They're inconsistent and uncoordinated, at least as to the extent that they could be much better. Gaps in the data availability, in all this mining effort that was undertaken last summer, we unearthed all of this. We unearthed the gaps, the barriers, the limitations, and the approaches that are myriad in terms of different agencies, departments collecting data for different purposes and not in a coordinated way that supports the overarching goals of the city. And we think that's definitely a call for leadership to maybe make some institutional changes there, if I can go so far as say that. So the variances in scale, boundaries, format, time frames, methods of data storage, all of these things become a real nightmare. But we can do better in the future. We're sure of that. The social and economic indicators we didn't touch deeply. Again, they're in the report, but we have serious concerns about what we see are pockets of poverty that are persistent throughout some neighborhoods of the city that track, decades. I'm talking about unemployment, poverty, school performance, health conditions, those kinds of things. We find there are clear socioeconomic patterns that the money being spent is not changing in the manner that we would like it to be a just city that we aspire to be. So that's a strong statement that I stand by in this report, and I think the findings will also support that. And I think these are things that we need to give more attention to. We can pride ourselves on our environmental achievements, but we can't be a truly sustainable city without it being a just city of opportunity for all. So on the job growth, there is, as mentioned, significantly less than was projected over 20 years. We don't know what the next 20 will be like. It's looking pretty positive right now. But we can't rest on that or rely on that necessarily. What will be the long-term trend? It's hard to predict job growth. There are lots of vagaries. Have we turned the corner? Maybe the next 20 will be quite different. With recent business expansions in South Lake Union and elsewhere in the city, it is looking optimistic. But we cannot assume that job creation and economic opportunity, wage equality, and other related issues are a given, particularly for the underserved in Seattle. And finally, there's a jobs housing imbalance here that is reflected in those numbers. And we're just to say that as we grow, we would like to see a reasonable balance between new households, population growth, and job growth. And there's some obvious reasons why that, because if one is way out of sync with the other, it creates other kinds of problems. So we point that out. Currently, another figure that is somewhat concerning here related to job growth and housing and patterns of growth is that 60% of the city's residents work outside the city. And I don't think too many people are aware of that. We got those figures from the Puget Sound Regional Council. They're the best figures that we could obtain in terms of origin, destination, patterns of travel. But if we're increasingly growing our housing stock here while people are working on the east side and other places, those are other kinds of issues that should be of regional planning concern, regional growth management concerns. So I just point that out, maybe an area for further attention. So we're moving now into our conclusion. I thank you for your patience here. You're a very serious audience. Okay, I guess some of it is serious stuff. So I borrow a quote from Robert Kennedy 50 years or more ago, which was popular at the time, is that we don't measure what really matters. And I think that we have shown here today and through this effort that we now have the tools and technologies in this digital age of big data to do exactly that, to measure what matters by measuring our performance and outcomes. So in conclusion, the urban village strategy is proven efficient, smart tool for channeling city resources, but needs better interdepartmental coordination and tracking. The use of neighborhood-level indicators can be of great strategic value. We think we've demonstrated that for creating new policies, better informed policies, tracking progress, allocating public resources, and informing those outcomes that I think the mayor and all the elected leaders, two of whom are here tonight at least, Sally Clark and Nick was here earlier, would like to have that information before making major decisions and about policies, programs, and investments. So we've probably overstated this need for coordinated data collection system, but it is and can be a tool for strategic investments with the ability to measure outcomes and means to strengthen community engagement so that we don't lose faith in our government and our bureaucracies and our elected leaders, because we need to know these things. We will not forget either. And when we make commitments, we need to see what's being delivered on them. Okay, so finally, a truly sustainable city is one that all communities must be equally served, share economic opportunities, quality of life, and good health. So that's my broader definition for the sustainable city that I hope that you all share and will carry forward. Finally, the best way to predict the future is to plan it. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I wanted to congratulate the writers of this study for some great work, path-breaking work, really informative and useful, certainly to establish a foundation for going forward with the next iteration of comprehensive planning in this city. So I think we should be thankful for having such a great basis of data available to us. I wanted to also just comment, I can't avoid making some observation independently, that as I go around the country and look at other comparable urban centers that have been getting a lot of ink in the press, the Denvers, the Chicagos, New York, Boston, I can't avoid but following some of the same kinds of trends that are happening in those urban centers. Crime rates are down, transit use is up, Those communities are experiencing increased density in a lot of locations, and it's basically reflective of a change of values. We now value urban places. We didn't do that as much 20 or 30 years ago. In fact, turning the clock back further, there was an anti-urban bias in our culture that basically said cities were dead. We didn't need them. We needed the suburbs. We needed land. We needed expansiveness. We needed outward growth. We didn't need to bother with cities anymore. And I think what we've done now in the last several decades is come full circle in realizing that these are our precious places. They're places to be cared for. They're livable. They have a lot of attributes that are valued by lots of people, and we're seeing people vote with their mortgages, vote with their feet, vote with their choice and how they move about the region, and things are changing. People are taking transit, learning to walk, learning to bike, doing other things in their life, making different choices, and it's at virtually many parts of our demographics that are doing this. Not just the millennials, but it's people who are aging and deciding to do different things as they live longer in their lives than ever before. So some of this data reflects those national trends. But I think it's also noteworthy that we have been doing things a bit differently than some other cities. As I said, when I go around to other cities, I notice that there are mini downtowns that are popping up all over the metro areas of towers that are hard-pressed right on single-family neighborhoods. And we've managed, for the most part, to avoid that kind of random phenomenon of things that happen sort of without thought and without planning, as Peter mentioned. So I think the data that's produced here is both hopeful and critical of where we need to go next. So I'd like to, I know that a number of you have questions, and there was supposed to be a mic. Oh, there's a mic up there. I'd like to just start off with a question, and that is, there's been concern in some quarters about whether or not having growth targets is really applicable to urban villages of all sizes and scales, and wonder if, based on the data that you've collected and the thought that you've been giving to this, if you might comment on that.
Some of you who've been involved in neighborhood planning know that there were targets set for X number of households for which those neighborhood plans were responding to, and which was kind of an agreed to number. There was not a deep rational basis for those targets that were set. I cannot to this day understand where they came from. They're not based on land use regulation, zone capacity, which is much, much higher. But so I think the answer to the question mark to that is, I think we can dispense with the targets at the sub-area level, but I don't think we absolutely cannot dispense with the tracking of absolute growth numbers in those areas over a period of time, a long period of time, not just 5 years, but so that you can see better the trends of how much growth and density is being achieved. Density numbers are good also to track, because there are pretty significant relative differences in the densities between neighborhoods. And our lowest density neighborhood today is Rainier Beach under our 10 urban village studies areas. And it's significantly lower than other areas. So I think those are more important absolute numbers that need to be closely tracked, but I think it's folly to set targets that seem artificial, arbitrary, unclear, and somewhat misleading. Because even if you meet that target, then what? Does development stop because you met the neighborhood's target? There's no way to legally do that. It is a zoned capacity, but we do need to know what is needed to support that growth in terms of program, amenities, services, transportation, et cetera.
Anybody else want to comment?
Add to that? Okay.
Hi, I'm Nathan Torgelson. I'm the Deputy Director at the Department of Planning and Development, and I would agree with what Mr. Steinbrueck is saying, and Mayor Murray has really challenged staff to look beyond the housing unit growth numbers and the job unit growth numbers, and to look at what are the indicators of what is really happening in the neighborhoods. And you know, Rainier Beach is a great example. We saw a really high investment number in Rainier Beach, and that's because of the new community and aquatic center, which is a wonderful facility for the neighborhood. but at the same time, we're not seeing other investments in that community. So we really need to dig deeper.
Before turning it over to the audience, I had one more question. That you commented about how this has become an increasingly desired city in terms of living places, and wonder if you had some thoughts on the implications of your data for decisions that the city might be making on housing density, housing type, location, any of those implications that could come out of your data.
Let me see if I understand that question. The popularity of Seattle.
Yes?
I think we're all pretty aware of that. It's continuously touted as the most, well, not the most livable. That goes to Vancouver, BC, I think, but it's up there. But the fastest growing. And as I mentioned, that really relates to the population growth. But there's no question to me, and I'm a lifelong resident here, that Seattle is and remains a highly, highly desirable place to live. And people will make sacrifices to live here if they can afford it, caution, caveat, to live here and work somewhere else. Likewise, those who can't afford it, living in Seattle, cannot find affordable housing, have to also travel long distances so that they can find the affordability. Often it's in southeast King County and other places north. But so the popularity of our city, I think, is well recognized. It has mature neighborhoods, it has urban lifestyles, it has arts and culture that exceeds any other city's opportunities in the region as a desirable place to live. It's not to say it's without problems, but I think, so I don't really know what the answer to your question is, but I think our popularity is, and the quality of life here for many explains the housing market as well. But that housing market is largely not producing affordable housing for everyday workers. And what do we do about that?
Okay, thank you. I'm Roger Pence. I'm on North Beacon Hill, and I was heavily involved in our neighborhood planning projects back in the 1990s, even preceding the big thing that happened under Norm Rice. I've got a couple of comments. First, on your transit data. I think it was a big mistake to not wrap in Sound Transit Link Light Rail, because in Southeast Seattle, there was a huge shift in transit ridership. A lot of existing bus riders moved to the train, freeing up seats on buses for more new riders. And by just discounting that, you end up with skewed data after 2009, when that service opened to the public. So if it's possible to fix that, you really ought to.
Well, we agree. Roger who? Roger's well known in the neighborhood circles. No, we agree that the full picture is not complete there without the more recent light rail service and the ridership there. It's about 30,000. To put it in perspective, and Roger, I know that you know the data far better than I, but I think that light rail today carries about 30,000 riders per day countywide, which is a tenth of what the Metro Transit carries, citywide. And eventually, light rail is expected to carry 300,000 riders by 2030. But obviously, there's a long way to go. So we could not get to that data and compile, the volume to do that. But your point is well taken.
Okay, I'm just concerned that looking at Metro bus transit data only could lead to skewed interpretations or incorrect interpretations. And my other question or issue is regard to the growth projections. You, I think, very wisely discounted the individual urban growth targets in the urban villages and focused on the collective. But we have to acknowledge that some urban villages, like Ballard, have been overwhelmed with growth, and others, like mine on North Beacon Hill, have barely seen anything. Are there any tools, any techniques to analyze and make some policy differences
as Nathan said, we need to really get at the specifics, and the growth targets don't really provide many answers in that regard. So density does. Density changes over time. We can see the rapid rate of growth in real numbers if we track that by population growth, employment, which is very important also to this equation, and density increases. And we know that needs grow with density, such as open space, such as tree preservation. We need to address the impervious surfaces that come with more growth, and you know, a whole range of things. But I think this is where we can get more specific.
Sir?
Also, in the report, we do have a kind of background demographic section for each of the urban villages that gets more at just the population and housing and changes in these areas. We just didn't, we wanted to kind of give a big picture for the presentation. So we do include that and consider that in the report.
But Roger, you're hitting on an excellent point that growth and investment has been very uneven across the city and urban villages. And a lot of the indicators are looking at people who are living in Seattle today, but as we grow, how do we measure and prevent, how do we measure people that are being forced out, who can't afford to live here anymore, and how do we prevent that? You'll see in Seattle 2035, when the draft plan comes out later this spring, equity is going to be a strong value that Mayor Murray is going to promote in that plan.
We've got another question.
Robert Canamar here, Commissioner with the Seattle Commission for People with Disabilities. This, by the way, people, was presented to the Commission some time ago. And in both reports, there are a couple of things that's glaringly absent. Now, you touched on one of them, Peter, on one of them, low income. We have a very high percentage of low-income people in our city as opposed to, say, Bellevue or other towns. Nowhere in your presentations, either one, have I seen anything that shows low-income residences. And when it comes to single-family units, what young people are going to look at, like the young lady there with her family, is not only what's the neighborhood like, schools, education. You have to include that when you are including any plan for urban development.
I absolutely agree with your point here. And there is an overwhelmingly amount of things that you can cover when you're looking at different communities, and especially when it comes to low-income residents. And we tried to do the best that we could to consider all of those factors. We did look at poverty rate, unemployment rate. We attempted to also look at academic performance, which is a challenging one when you're looking at one single metric that's replicable and really kind of speaks to the access to good quality schools in different neighborhoods. But I definitely hear your point there. And I think that moving forward, those kinds of comments can inform maybe looking at which indicators we really want to emphasize in informing policy and planning.
And I would just add that we're absolutely very mindful, as Mikaela said, and did our best to try to identify and equate and correlate with low income and social and economic inequities. Is getting the information about where the low-income households are and in what number is very challenging to get current data on that. There are sources, largely from the American Community Surveys, which are only surveys and are not up to date. They're from the past. So it's very, very difficult and challenging, and I suspect that the city knows well some of these challenges of being able to better target and identify and target communities that are of lower income and what those special needs may be. But there are a host of indicators, as Mikaela says, that certainly point the way.
Nathan, did you want to add anything? Or no? Next, we have the next question. Oh, good. Oh.
I'll just swing it down this way. One of the problems that I've noticed this city having pertaining to low-income housing, and I'm going to use one specific building as an example. The QFC on 24th at 57th and Ballard. You mentioned Ballard several times. In order to get the permit for the developer to build that building in the first place, the developer had to include a certain percentage of low-income units. One of the things was included a tax incentive. Unfortunately, right after it opened, out of curiosity, I went and checked and see if there were any low-income units. There were none. The developer said no, but they're getting that incentive. How's that practice going to stop?
I don't think that's a very specific question.
It's a policy issue for the elected
I'm
leaders
not sure
to tackle. Sally Clark, are you still
it's fair to.
Yeah, but thank you, Robert. Thanks very much. We've got some other people with questions.
Yep.
Well, I was involved in a study called Designing for Affordability and Density with Mark and Michael Piatuk 20 years ago at the UW, and it was leading up to the comprehensive plan. And one of the things that we were looking at was the issue of diversity of housing types as we build more densely. And I was curious I know you didn't get into the architecture design per se, but I'm curious about that question about diversity, and in particular about whether we're seeing diverse unit types in terms of bedroom number and that. The general sense is that it seems like we're building a lot of 1s and 2 bedrooms and very few family-oriented units, and I'm curious what the data is saying about that.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. What is your name, by the way?
Daniel Glenn. I'm an architect.
Thank you, Daniel. I sort of assumed that. And I personally walked every one of these urban villages, and sometimes more than twice, and observed the qualitative aspects, even though we didn't cover that in the report. But I also wanted to see, to look for the completeness of the neighborhoods in terms of meeting the needs for growth and density, as well as the urban design architectural aspects, and the point that you make so well taken about the need for a diversity of housing types, which addresses some of the affordability issues without subsidies. And we're lacking that in this city. I can say that fairly confidently. We're seeing certain typologies being built, such as the 5/1 full block apartment building, the townhouse 6-pack auto-centric model off the shelf, and a few others, micro housing, AKA apartments now. But we could have a much greater array. And those are challenges for the zoning and planning, zoning planners, land use planners, city officials, policymakers. Maybe Nathan has something to add to that.
I was just going to add the mayor's housing affordability and livability agenda task force is grappling with this issue right now. And that task force's recommendations should be coming out right before the draft comprehensive plan. So that's certainly something we'll be taking into consideration.
Next question.
Thank you, Peter and Mikaela. Nathan. Luis Borrero with Drive Decisions and with the Seattle Planning Commission. I completely agree with you about the importance of consistency in the data, and that's what allows us to measure success. Nevertheless, the urban village boundaries, their boundaries themselves were traced kind of with community involvement, a little bit obscure origin, in the same way that the targets were, you can't find that origin. I can't find the origin for the boundaries. Nevertheless, 20 years later, we're making really important decisions, and your indicators include ridership per population per acre. Many of these boundaries include single-family houses, housing zones inside of them, and they're not consistent that way. The answer I'm seeking is a yes, no. Would you recommend that at this point in the new comp plan and moving forward, we actually take the liberty of analyzing those boundaries?
Yes, in fact, we did recommend that in the report, that there be a re-examination of some of the designations. And some areas of the city have all the makings of a good urban village, but aren't urban villages, so they don't get the attention in some regards. I could name them, but I don't want to put anybody's community on the spot. But the boundaries, I do know a little bit about the background of how those boundaries were set, and Tom is an expert on that. But there is a good, compelling rationale to revisit those boundaries. It does open up a whole nother process. Hopefully not an endless one, but it is a well-taken point that you make, Louis. And I hope everybody gets to see some of your fantastic work around visualization tools that are available.
I wanted to say that we're going to be closing in about 10, 15 minutes. So if you could keep anybody that's got questions, you could keep it to a single question rather than something that keeps getting added onto. So next.
Thank you. Well, my name is Brian Derdowski, and I served on the King County Council back in 1994 when you were working on this plan. And I want to thank you for your excellent work on this. And you know, everyone in this room knows that there's a historic election, district election, and it's likely that that election is going to be, the issue of land use and growth management is going to be front and center. And so I'm wondering if you could offer some observations. I noticed there were some potential candidates for council here, and I wonder if you could offer some thoughts about which of your findings are the most likely to be part of that political debate, and so that those candidates can start to focus on those issues.
That's a loaded question.
That was a loaded question, Brian. Thank you very much. I think it would
let's treat it as a rhetorical question.
I think it would be wise for me not to answer that except through private conversations.
Yeah. Next.
Hi, my name is Matt Pearsall. I'm a resident in the Georgetown neighborhood down in South Seattle. Thank you. And we're not an urban village, but we have a lot of issues that are similar to that. One of the things I was struck by in your presentation was the conversation about a lack of growth in jobs, less growth in jobs than was predicted, as well as an issue with housing not being near to employment. And along that, I also saw in the information that was posted outside that there's been no growth in industrial jobs in the city. That those numbers have been flat. And so, with that in mind, I'm curious your thoughts about right now down in Georgetown. We're looking at some issues with changes to the comp plan, which seem to really favor industrial growth over the commercial mixed-use growth and residential growth that could be happening down there.
Absolutely. Thanks again. Your name again?
Matt Pearsall.
Okay. Well, I have to disclose that my father grew up in Georgetown by the river, and his father worked for the railroad. So there's a long family history there, and I'm incredibly enamored with Georgetown for a lot of reasons. And I don't think it's dying or dead, as has been said before. But it also is a remarkable community in its diversity in many respects, but in the fact also that there are a considerable number of people who live and work in Georgetown and getting to that jobs housing balance. And I think that's something to hold on to and that more communities could identify with and benefit from. So I don't think there's any clear answer to what you're saying. Nathan, do you have anything to add to that perspective?
Well, the city is currently engaged in a planning process in Georgetown, and those are definitely the issues that we're looking at.
Will you be doing the study promised in 2007 on land use in Georgetown?
We're working on it right now.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Hi there, I'm Dan Sanchez. I understand that one of the goals of the urban village concept is to preserve single-family housing and zoning, and certainly it seems that the discussion of rezoning single family is pretty much untouchable right now. My question is, for instance, 23rd and Union, we're currently rezoning from 40 feet to 65 feet. If single-family zones were to remain untouchable, 20 years from now, are we going to be talking about rezoning to 120 feet, or does it make more sense to expand the LR zones into single-family?
I've followed this closely over the years, and I know some of the rationale for why that provision was in the original comprehensive plan, and it actually states to protect single-family neighborhoods, which is something that a lot of people value in this city. Unfortunately, we're at one city, and we have only so much land to grow and develop. There have been changes to our single-family neighborhoods. There were no accessory dwelling units allowed back then, for example. We did some pilot studies around cottage housing, around other forms of housing that would appear to be compatible with a single-family character. I think there's still opportunity there. We now allow detached ADUs, mother-in-laws, I think all over the city now. I don't think there's any prohibition. And that's a reasonable option for a significant accommodation of new growth right there, if people are willing to take that on, and if the regulations aren't overly burdensome in that regard. One of my first acts on the city council in 98 was to revise and streamline the accessory dwelling unit ordinance with a red pen. And it was obviously hotly contested, and not everybody's going to be happy. But so I think that there is opportunity. We have a kind of an inverse relationship where the families with children can't afford the housing. The housing is where the 3, 4, and 5 bedrooms are. And we're not building enough multifamily with multiple bedrooms that's affordable. Now, so that's for the mayor and the housing task force to tackle, okay? Not to dodge the issue.
The Housing Task Force is looking at attached accessory dwelling units and accessory dwelling units. For example, should we continue to have the one off-street parking space requirement? Is that something we can loosen up to encourage more of those units within the existing character of single-family zones?
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Sorgan. I live in Finney Wood, which is between Finney Ridge and Greenwood, and I've been in the same house now for 43 years. I'm in an SFD, by the way. Anyway, my question is, at one point there was a big discussion about the possibility of universal design as well as building in ADA requirements for new dwellings. What happened to it?
I think that's Nathan, unless you're prepared to answer, I think that's a very specific question that isn't quite in keeping with the
I just
data
appreciate, though, that you bring up the issue. It's something that is, we don't have time to get into tonight. I'm very familiar with the principles of universal design and have been an advocate for them for years. But that's a longer, more complex set of issues that maybe we could continue the conversation with. But thank you, Jacqueline.
I appreciate that,
but
Peter. Thank you, dear.
It may be worth highlighting, though, that it does get overlooked, that it could be a
Does everyone know what universal design is here? Yeah, okay, it's designing for all ages in place, basically, is the simple principle. It's good sense, good practice for architects.
Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening. My name is Battery Bob. I'm the executive director of the Unique Company in Federal Way, Washington. And sometimes when we have a massive problem, the solution is very, very simple. I have that solution. I can solve practically every problem that you discussed here tonight. And I would like to make an appointment with you to share that information at your convenience. I mean, I can give everybody here, but I honestly can. The simple, very, very simple solution to these complex problems, I honestly and truthfully have the solution to these problems. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So we have one person left, and I think we're going to be on time. Go ahead. You've got the floor.
Diana Kincaid, Park Board. And I have a question, you've already touched on it a little bit, about the single-family neighborhoods. I live in one. And I feel like sometimes we're almost becoming a suburb with the way services are dispersed. And yet we want to be as green as possible ourselves. And so along those same lines, I'm thinking about the single-family residential neighborhoods. Why not offering a kind of renovate program, like the energy power program, where you're encouraging people perhaps to renovate their homes so they could become like flats, maybe duplexes, triplexes. You could do an easy density increase in certain areas that way. You could get mixed incomes in residences that way. You could get mixed generations in homes that way. So you could really address a number of different issues by approaching it from this standpoint. as well as supporting the urban villages as well.
I think those are all good points, Diane. Thank you for bringing them up. Excellent ideas.
So is this something that you can
these
input?
options and challenges and supports. This is up to our city, staff and our and elected leaders to tackle.
It seems to me that what I've been hearing from your report, the summary of it, is that, in fact, there is no real limit to sustainability, and there is no real limit to capacity to grow in this town. It's just a matter of making these incremental adjustments by rezoning or maybe conserving more. But how did you deal with that issue of capacity in an urban environment to accept growth and retain the quality that we are aiming for or desire?
Okay. Thank you, and it's honor that you have the last question here, and then I can respond to it, knowing all that you've done to work toward quality of life goals in city and preserving character and the rest. There's no real answer to that, and there is no ideal model of urban sustainability, but I think the point I was trying to drive home is that it's not simply environmental sustainability. It's quality of life. It's the happiness quotient. It's our sanity. It's our ability to have mobility and options. It's a livability quotient. It's all those things. That makes it pretty broad and diffuse. But I think as an ideal, it is worth striving for. It is what our 1994 comprehensive plan is subtitled, Toward a Sustainable City. And we're still aspiring to be that sustainable city in the ideal sense. And we have a lot of work and a lot of ways to go there. So beyond that, you raised the issue of capacity limits. Well, look at some of the cities in China. You might say they've exceeded those limits, where density limits, are skyrocketing, or densities. But look at cities like Paris, where Diane is from, and the quality of life in Paris. Now, they've got their issues and challenges, but they've got a whole different approach there. And cities like Istanbul that are adding 500,000 people per year to their metro region, growing, exponentially as a mega city. So I think there's no good answer for what those capacity limits are, but I think it's important to focus on quality of life issues that we value and wish to preserve. And we need to be intentional about doing that.
So, thanks, Irene. Oh, did you want?
Mark, before you close, I just wanted to really thank Peter and Mikaela for their great work. This is a fantastic foundation for coming up with indicators. Again, the mayor has really challenged us to come up with meaningful indicators, not just housing numbers, not just growth numbers, but what is really happening in the urban villages. So thank you very much.
Yep. And do take a look at the document when it's available tomorrow.